screen and we will go into slideshow. Okay. This one, share, and wait a second, we'll go to slideshow. It will appear. Yeah, here we go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Good morning. Those who don't know who I am, I'm Jean-Pierre Scherman, and I am currently teaching at the South African Military Academy in South Africa. Our academy has got two different linked entities. In the one sense, it is a military unit of the South African National Defence Force, and I am an officer that is in uniform every single day. But it is also the Faculty of Military Science of Stellenbosch University. So we have civilian staff and we have military staff working in our academy. And as you can see on the board, I've come all the way here to talk to you a little bit about a national heritage of South Africa, the LIPIZZANE'Rs. But before we start to that, yesterday was quite an important day in equine history, specifically military equine history. For those of you who didn't know, yesterday's anniversary, the 341st anniversary of the Battle of Vienna, which also happens to coincide with the largest cavalry charge ever taking place on this planet. The Muslims have been besieging Vienna for almost 2 months, and the Holy Roman Empire is defending the city. And the King of Poland rides to the relief of the city. And after a day's fighting, the Poles arrived just before sunset. And the King of Poland lines up his cavalry forces, who number 18,000 horsemen. And he divides them into 4 groups. And leading his own winged hussars, the Polish cavalry attack the Muslim defending forces. And it is one of the most important military battles of Europe, in the sense that it turns the tide of battle and it prevents the Muslim takeover of Western Europe. So from a historical perspective, that took place yesterday. So it's a very important cavalry, equine, military history day was celebrated yesterday. That being said, let's talk about what I actually came here for, the LIPIZZANE'Rs. After losing the First Punic War, fought against their arch enemies, the legionnaires of Rome, the Phoenicians of Carthage, which are Africans, in case you are wondering, invade the Iberian Peninsula to establish a financial base from which they claimed to finance a second war against Rome. The Carthaginian general, Hamilcar Barca, accompanied by his son-in-law, Hasdrubal, and his son, Hannibal, landed the port of Cadiz in southwestern Spain in 237, bringing along with them large cavalry forces as part of their invading army. These cavalry forces mounted on the barb, the native horse of North Africa. Barbs are not big horses, seldom being taller than 14 hands, but they were nimble and responsive to the slightest touch of the reins. They were accustomed to harsh environments, strong, sure-footed, fleet, yet smooth. Their strong loins and quick intelligence enabled them to master and perform quick turns and elevated positions required for close combat. Most of all, the barb had extreme courage and was unfazed by blows or wounds. To the contrary, barbs often seemed like they relished the fight. With the outbreak of the Second Punic War, fought in Spain, Italy, and eventually North Africa, the Romans were to encounter Nubian cavalry mounted on these barbs for the first time. The Romans soon noticed these qualities. The second-hand Roman writer Claudius and Linnaeus, describing the barb, then known as the Nubian horse, as follows: "They are small, but not very beautiful. But to their credit," he added, "they're extraordinarily fast and strong and willful, so tame that they can be ridden without a bit or reins and be guided simply with a cane." With the eventual defeat and destruction of Carthage by Rome during the Third Punic War, Rome inherits all these horses of the Carthaginian armies, including them in North Africa and in Spain. Between 711 and 718 AD, the Muslims launched their conquest of Hispania. The invading Muslim armies arriving in Spain on foot and mainly fight as infantry, as their Arabian horses are far too valuable to be used as cavalry mounts. Instead, These Muslim cavalry forces also turned to the bar, who soon becomes an important component of their armies fighting in Spain. The bar was a breed especially well suited to the so-called Spanish jinta style of riding, in which a rider relied on his horse to place him in the position to throw, thrust, parry, or dodge as required. Named after the Algerian Zemita tribe, this style required a steed trained to anticipate the rider's actions and obey without hesitation. As a military term, jinta means a Spanish light horseman that wore leather armor and was armed with a javelin, a spear, or a sword, and a shield. They were a type of mounted troop developed in the Middle Ages in response to the mass light cavalry of the Muslim forces, often fielded in significant numbers by the Spanish, and at times the most numerous of the Spanish mounted troops. They played an important role in Spanish mounted warfare throughout the Reconquest until the 16th century. Following the reconquest of Iberia by Christian forces, this land passes into the hands of Charles I, the son of Philip of Habsburg, of the Austrian House of Habsburg. The advent of the Habsburg dynasty, which would rule both Spain and Austria, resulted in the need for a powerful but agile war horse. Additionally, a horse was also required for the rapidly growing and increasingly fashionable classical riding schools of Central European nobility, which have been revived in the Renaissance. Consequently, in 1562, Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II brought Spanish Andalusian horses to Austria, where he founded the court stud at Kladrup, modern Kladrup in the Czech Republic. After the emperor's death, his brother, Archduke Charles II, imported 9 Spanish stallions and 23 mares and established a similar stud at Lipizzan, modern Lipica, in the littoral region of Slovenia, close to the border with Italy. And it's from these mixture of horses the new breed would eventually obtain its name. Initially, Spanish, Barb, and Arabian stock were all crossed at Lipizzan, and the succeeding generations were crossed with a now extinct Neapolitan breed from Italy and other Baroque horses of Spanish descent, obtained from Germany and Denmark. While breeding stock was exchanged between the two studs, Kladrup specialized in producing heavy carriage horses, while riding and light carriage horses came from the Lipizzan stud. Eventually, the modern Lipizzan horse breed, small but powerful, usually standing between 14.2 and 15.2 hands high, was to emerge from this process. Thank you. The Jankovics-Bésán family. Now, this family plays a very important part in South Africa's Lipizzan horses, and you'll quickly see how. The quick look at the horse of the family itself. In 1745, Count Anton Jankovic purchased the northern part of the Sirek estate in the Slovenian region of Croatia from the royal chamberlain of the Habsburg Empire. Before I continue, some of the names that come now are in Croatian and in Hungarian, and quite a tongue twister for my South African tongue. So please excuse some of the pronunciations and go with it as you hear it. I've tried my best, but some of them are quite just beyond my abilities just to pronounce sometimes. From 1771 to 1776, Count Jankovic built a castle on the estate. The castle is surrounded by a park and several houses, which will eventually become the town of Darevar. Julia Janković de Pribér, the widowed wife of Anton Janković de Pribér, purchased an estate named Terezovac, located in the Vitrovitica Podravina region of Croatia. Here, she establishes the Terezovac stud farm, which by 1800 is considered one of the best studs in Europe. In 1860, the first Lipizzan stallions and mares arrived at Terezovac from the Royal Habsburg stud located in Lipica. In 1843, another member of this large horse family, Isidor Jankovic, establishes a second stud farm on the family estate at Izidorovac near modern Lipica in modern Croatia. In 1890, inheritance squabbles result in a second stud farm moving to Gabuna, about 8 kilometers southwest of the original stud at Terezovac. In 1906, this branch of the family sells their stud farms at Lipica to Stefan Lejer of Virovitica. And in 1920, the family finally leaves Croatia, moving all the remaining horses that they own to a stud farm in the town of Oreglak in western Hungary. And you see that where the origins of South Africa's Lipizzaners come from, are actually coming from Hungary. In 1944, in the middle of the Second World War, Count Elemér Jankovics-Bésán de Pribér-Vuchin is forced to flee from Oreglak due to the approaching Soviet army, and he takes his horses with him. He is frightened that the Russians will grab his horses and capture them and eat them. So what he does is he takes oil and he rubs it onto their coats to make them look sickly and make them look ill. And he puts them onto normal, hooks them onto normal carriages, and he drags them away from the approaching Russian army. By a mixture of good luck and fortune, he is able to avoid the Russian forces and eventually arrives in Bavaria in Germany, traveling by wagon and eventually by train. However, Germany has been destroyed in the Second World War, and he soon realizes that the horses cannot survive in Germany. He must move out of Germany. So then he moves the horses to the estate of the 11th Baron of Digby in Dorset in England. And from there, he decides that Europe is no longer a safe place for the Lipizzaners, and he decides to move all the way to South Africa, taking his horses with him. And he moves 2 stallions and 6 mares to the town of Mooiriver, Afrikaans for Pretty River, in the KwaZulu-Natal region of South Africa. They're on the east coast along the Indian Ocean. Very lush, very tropical, one of the largest areas of Africa with the most rain and obviously a lot of grazing. The second gentleman that plays a very important part in our story is this one, Major George Iwanowski. George Iwanowski is born in 13 March 1907 on his family property in Lebidoka in what is then Poland. It is now modern Lida in western Belarus. After school, he goes to university and earns a degree with a dissertation that examines horse breeding from the College of Agriculture in Warsaw. He begins working as an assistant manager at the Polish National Stud. At the outbreak of the Second World War, he reports for duty and is quickly incorporated into the Polish cavalry forces of the Second World War. After the war, he is commissioned by the Polish army with the rank of major and tasked to take over the German SS platform at Laubenburg in the Rhineland. His task is to go and try and scour across Europe, looking for all the lost horses that have been stolen out of Poland during the war by the German army, and see how many of these horses he can recover for the Polish state. However, after the Soviet occupation of Poland, he too decides that Europe is no longer where he wants to be, and he also decides to emigrate to South Africa. On his arrival in Johannesburg, in South Africa, he sets out what he calls to meet horsey people, because he doesn't speak the local language, he doesn't know anything about South Africa. The only thing that he knows is he likes horsey people. And horsey people are the same wherever you are in the world, so he looks to try and find some horsey people that he can communicate with. And also to try and find employment. In this way, he finds employment working on a stud farm in the semi-desert Karoo region of South Africa. Now, you can't be more different from where the one gentleman is in KZN. It's very, very lush, it's very tropical. The Polish gentleman ends up basically in our desert. So they are on opposite sides of the country and in completely opposite, but both working in a horse environment. The major, after working in the desert, decides that it is very isolated. There's not a lot happening. Yes, he's working on a horse farm. Yes, it's surrounded by horse people, but there is a better way to make a living. And he returns to the city of Johannesburg, where him and a South African decide to form a partnership and start their own stabling and start their own horses. As luck would have it, in 1951, the Hungarian count that owns the horses and the Polish cavalry officer meet by chance at the Royal Agricultural Show in Pietermaritzburg. Speaking in broken Yiddish, which is the only language that the two gentlemen share, the Count learns that the Major is trained in the foremost level of the high riding school, as practiced by the Spanish riding school in Vienna. He immediately invites the Major up to his stud farm in Moon River to come and inspect his LIPIZZANER'S. The Count offers the Major the LIPIZZAN stallion Maestro Eredin for training. His only requirement that Iwanowski was to train the stallion up to the international poetical high school level of the Spanish riding school. In his book, The White Stallions of Kyalami, Iwanowski writes about this exceptional horse. Maestro Eredin was 3 years old, dirty grey, and moved with the charm of a young bear trying to be graceful. But there was something irresistible about his personality, his behavior, and his large, intelligent eyes. Our relationship was the foundation of the LIPIZZAN team. The Major immediately begins training the stallion according to the Spanish riding school in Vienna's high standards. By the mid-1950s, Iwanowski happens to meet Colonel Hans Heindler, the second in command of the Spanish riding school, while he is at a horse show in Rhodesia, today modern Zimbabwe. Heindler begins traveling to South Africa once a year to evaluate and help train the LIPIZZANER'S and maintain the standard as practiced by the Spanish riding school. Iwanowski slowly develops a team of 8 stallions, written all by women. Now, those of you who know the Spanish riding school, a little bit about the history. Generally, it's a men-only sport, but in South Africa, the LIPIZZANER'S were not, the riders were not getting paid. So the only people that had the time were the wives of people, the men were all working. So that's why in South Africa, generally all the LIPIZZANER riders are all women, simply because all the men were working. By 1957, the LIPIZZANER'S are traveling South Africa, giving performances to enchanted admirers. Iwanowski builds the first ever riding school in Kyalami. It's outside Johannesburg in the central part of South Africa, our economic hub, in 1969. And by 1971, regular Sunday performances of the LIPIZZANER'S are taking place. And the first one is opened by Heindler, who is now the chief of the Spanish riding school in Vienna. By 1976, instructors from Austria are regularly coming to South Africa to elevate and train the LIPIZZANER'S. They are to ensure that the high standards of the Spanish riding school are maintained within South Africa. After almost 70 years at Kyalami, in 2021, mostly due to COVID and the lack of tourists coming through, the LIPIZZANER'S move out of Johannesburg and they come close to where we now stay in Cape Town, simply because Cape Town draws more international tourists. And with the wine industry and all those type of attractions, it was just financially better to have the LIPIZZANER'S closer to a major tourist base to ensure their continued financial survival. They go to the Mystico Equestrian Centre, which is in the town of Paarl, just outside South Africa. The LIPIZZANER'S are a national treasure of South Africa, trained to the high standards of the Spanish riding school, and I warmly invite you to come to South Africa to enjoy their performances amid the spectacular wine country of the Cape of Good Hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And if you're wondering, that is where I work. That is at the academy, and that is obviously the entrance to our equestrian center. Our third-year students are required as part of their military training to go through equestrian training as well. Thank you.
Very impressive. We will give questions to them, but online participants can have the privilege of putting them in the chat if they want to. I think I might forget it. Or after both papers, they can raise hand and this. Okay, so I'll stop sharing and also stop